Well, today we have the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that we're looking at today. And I say parable because I believe it's a parable. You'll get into commentaries and online, and you'll have some people say that this isn't a parable, that Jesus is telling a story primarily because Jesus never gives the people in parables a name. There are some who will say Jesus is speaking into the politics of his time. But really what you see here is Jesus is speaking a series of parables. As the Pharisees are pushing and searching and seeking to trip him up. And, well, in the midst of it all, being a good steward is the question that's being asked. The Pharisees are not being good stewards of what God has given to them. And they have led the people of Israel into mismanagement. And this parable follows the parable of the dishonest steward that you see was last week. This one is a little more pointed. This one is one that we often see come Sunday school morning, and it's often given a rather pointed moral story. Don't be like the rich man. Be like Lazarus. And yet, so often we miss that this is a parable that is brimming with reversals. The poor man becomes rich. The rich man becomes poor. The poor man starts outside the gates of the rich man's house and ends inside of Abraham's embrace while the rich man is outside. The poor man has no food and ends feasting, and the rich man has plenty and yet ends begging for a simple drop of water. The poor man has so many needs, and the rich man has everything. And then you see a reversal there too. The poor man is surrounded by dogs, and the rich man is surrounded by wealth, and then that is reversed at the end. And by the way, just to throw this out here, you may have looked at that and gone, "Aw, even the puppies came and licked his wounds." In the Old Testament, the dogs were only mentioned for one purpose and one purpose alone. They show up numerous times in the Old Testament, and each time they are eating corpses. So when the dogs come up to lick the poor man's wounds, this isn't puppy love. This is taste testing. Yeah, it's that ugly. That he sits at the rich man's gate and he doesn't even drive away the dogs. The poor man wants help and receives none. At the end of the parable, the rich man who wants help isn't able to give it. A poor man who is, no dignity, and yet a rich man who finds no dignity in death. There's all these reversals. But today I want to focus on the biggest of the reversals. And that's in a simple name. We take names for granted. We really do. In fact, so often we mistake titles and names as well. If somebody came up and asked me, "Who am I?" my temptation is to talk about my office, whether that be pastor, father, husband. It's to talk about all the things that I've accomplished. These are all the accolades that are added to my name. But very often we don't go straight for our name. I have a very simple name, Dan. 3 letters. In grade school, I was one of 5 Daniels in my class. So there was Dan, Danny, Daniel, and then there was Danny C and Danny H. It's how you told them all apart. My wife, if you ask her, being a Mariah in the 90s wasn't unusual. Thank you, Mariah Carey. So there were many. It's one of the reasons we decided our children were going to carry different names. We wanted our children to actually be the only one in their class with their names. So we sought names that had Christian meanings, but we also wanted different names. Naming a child is not easy. You know that. To any of you who have done it, you've gone back and forth. My wife and I had a system. We each wrote 5 names down. We had the ability then to each veto one name from the other's list. And then I brought that into the youth group and I said, here you go, do your worst. Make fun of the name. Give it the biggest beating you can. And if they looked at it and went, there's really not much we can do with this, that's the goal. We had one of the names that we were talking about for my daughter was Savannah Rose. Sounds really pretty, doesn't it? Yeah. I gave it to the high schoolers, and I said, what do you think? And they go, oh, that's all really pretty. At the end of class, I had a young man walk up to me, look me dead in the eye, and he goes, Pastor, I don't know if I would say this out loud, but I love you, so I'm going to say it. I said, okay. Savannah Rose sounds like a stage name, and I believe that stage has a pole on it. And then walked away. And I went, how do you know about those stages? No, but yeah, so it was like, all right, that one got crossed off. One of the other names that I wanted was Amanda Victoria Howard for my daughter. I'm picking on her because her birthday's this week. So, that's what's got this on my mind. And my wife goes, that's pretty. Why do you want it? Well, I said, Amanda gets shortened to Mandy, and Victoria gets shortened to? Nope. Tori. So she's Amandy Tori Howard. My wife immediately crossed that name off. Yeah. We put a lot of thought into names. So did you notice here in this parable, there's a contrast too. Lazarus is Lazarus. The rich man is rich man. Why is that? Why does Lazarus get a name and the rich man doesn't? Surely as a rich and wealthy man, he was well known. If I say Bill Gates, you know who I'm talking about. Steve Jobs, you know who I'm talking about. Michael Jordan, Mike Tyson, you know who I'm talking about. Your name? Not picking on you, but if I drop your name in public, they're not going to go, oh, I know who you're talking about. They've made millions. With wealth comes Familiarity. You win the lottery and suddenly you're going to have a lot of family members you didn't even know you had come out of the woodwork. Suddenly they're going to know your name. Why? Because you got money. Money brings familiarity. The hardest thing to do when you have wealth. You know, the number of people who win the lottery and they want to stay anonymous. We understand this. So do you see where it's a little strange? Lazarus gets a name. And there are some people who go, well, that's why it's not a parable. Because Jesus never drops names in parables. But he's saying something here. Lazarus and a rich man. And the story simply starts with the rich man, making him the main character of the story. The rich man is there and he feasts lavishly. I mean, that's what it's saying. Yeah, I know it says sumptuously, but I don't think that's a word you use much anymore. He feasts daily. And at the gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the table. And the dogs licked his sores. Contrast of two. And we often get caught up in this because we live in a day and an age where everybody wants to be rich, but also everybody wants to throw stones at anybody who has money. We live in discussions of late-stage capitalism and whether or not you have a responsibility to share and spread the wealth, or is that an obligation, or should we take it and redistribute it? Don't get caught up in that. Instead, go back to what we talked about in the table of duties. As Christians, we have two commandments. The first is to love the... We're going to try this again because we're in church, is to love the... Thank you. For a moment there, I thought I had to resign. The second is to love your... Yeah. That's our charging. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. And here's a man who has to trip over fellow man to get out of his house. And does nothing. His security isn't even chasing away the dogs. Tells you something about each man, doesn't it? And yet, you have the rich man and you have Lazarus. So if it's important that he's named, what does it mean? Well, Lazarus as a whole means God is my help. Just like Daniel means God is my judge, Lazarus means God is my help. It's actually a shortened form in Greek of the Hebrew name Eleazar. And I'm sure you're all going, yes, I remember Eleazar from my Old Testament readings of Genesis 15, because Pastor, I was just there in my devotions. And I would go, I'm so proud of you. Eleazar in Genesis 15 is the steward of Abraham. He is the one who was in charge of all of Abraham's property and management and made sure that it was used accordingly. In fact, Abraham at one point thought Eleazar was going to be his heir because he had no children, so the guy that manages everything is going to get everything. Eleazar becomes a little bit of a legend himself. in the Jewish folklore called the Midrash. Not Midrash. Midrash is I saw a couple of looks there. It's a book that the rabbis teach out of. In the Midrash, it is said, Eleazar still walked the earth, dressed as a beggar, testing to see how well the nation of Israel keeps the Torah, and especially their hospitality and how they care for the poor and for strangers and travelers. And then Eleazar would go back to Abraham and give him a status update. You see the writer of Hebrews grab a hold of that in 13:2 when he says, some of us have entertained angels disguised as strangers. But that's another sermon. Eleazar, Lazarus, a simple test laid at the gate to see if the rich man would love God and love his neighbor. Now, I could talk about whether or not we would pass that test of loving God and loving our neighbor. But today I want to go a different route. The road less traveled. Today I want to talk about the power of having a name. You see, Lazarus was Lazarus. Lazarus' name proclaimed a truth, that God is my help. Why do you need help? If somebody asks you, I need help, what are they saying? I can't do it by myself. See, I don't ask for help if I can do it myself. If I am sitting at the counter trying to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and I ask for help from my wife is going to look at me and go, what is wrong with you? It's peanut butter. Like she's going to, did my hand cramp? Did my fingers break? What on earth is going on that you can't do that? If I get into a gym and I start powerlifting and I ask for help, need a spot, it's admitting that I am not going to get this bar where it needs to be, and if you don't help me, I'm in trouble. So when we say God is our help, we are admitting right off the bat, I am not capable of doing what needs to be done without God. Lazarus, his very name proclaims, I can't do it on my own. He lives a Lazarus. He dies a Lazarus. The rich man, Abraham looks at him and says, you've had it all. You chose to make your identity your accomplishments, your stuff. You lived a rich man. You died a rich man. You see, it's not about the wealth. It's about the attitude. You wanted that to be your identity in life. Now it's your identity in death. And you see that in a lot of Jesus' parables. Jesus never condemns having wealth. He condemns what you do with it. The man has a great harvest, an abundant harvest. It fills his barns. And instead of looking to the community, he builds more barns and he says, I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry because my wealth is laid up and I can live on it for many years. And God says, you fool, because today your soul's going to be accounted and whoever's left behind will split your wealth and you have no say in how it's spent. Talk about the parable of the talents. You're not in trouble for spending the talents. You're in trouble for burying the talents. Because the Lord gives to you each according to their own ability. And I've said it before, I'm a firm believer. The reason the Lord didn't give me millions is because He knows what I would do with millions. My mistakes would become so much cooler. Yeah, I chose that word intentionally. There'd be signs. We look at wealth, and we look at those who have it, and we get judgmental. And we look at the poor, and we look at those who are lacking, and like they said at the end, well, why doesn't God just bless them more? And I have stood before you and I have said, and I will say it again, that we forget that the Lord gives us blessings for the sole purpose of blessing our neighbor, so that you might have the joy of being a blessing and the opportunity to proclaim who Christ is in giving that blessing. There are many times that blessings flow from the Lord's hands and they pass through your hands on the way to where they're supposed to go. And the rich man, instead of being that conduit, became a dam. And so he had his good things, and he had the Lord's blessings in life, but his attitude kept him from looking at the Lord as his help. And instead, he wanted to be known as a rich man in life. So he became a rich man in death. And it's easy, again, to get very moralistic in it. For those of you who have a lot of wealth, remember, it's Pastor Appreciation Month, and Dave said, that way you can be poor before the Lord, and then you can go to heaven. Yeah, you laugh. But there's entire sermons based on that. The truth is, whether you have, whatever blessing you have, the Lord has given you something in abundance. But again, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the power of a name. And I want to end in the power of a name. Because you see, Lazarus didn't get to heaven because he was poor, and the rich man didn't get kept out of heaven because he was rich. The rich man didn't know who God was and wanted to go to heaven based on what he had done on earth. And if you're going to stand before the Lord and say, this is why I deserve to be saved, every time you are going to be turned away. But if you come before the Lord and you say, I am a sinner and I need help. I am Lazarus. I am Eleazar. I can't do this on my own. I need a Savior. When you say that out loud, do you know what God says? Here is my son. Hear his words. Take his body. Take his blood. Let the sin that was yours go to him. And you hear the words, it is finished. Because of what he did, not because what you did. It is why we stand here And as Lutherans, we say things like, I, a poor, miserable, wretched sinner. Because when you say that out loud, you are reminded by God that it's about what He did, the help He sent, the blessings He gives, what was poured out for you. But when you come before the Lord in arrogance, and you want to talk about what you've done, what you deserve, what you are, the Lord will say, fine, you can pray, thy will be done to me, or I will say, thy will be done to you. It's why Jesus in other parables says, sit at the bottom of the table so you're invited up, not at the head of the table, so that you will be dismissed down. It's why we don't come in and we say, I was a saint this week. Let me talk about all the things I did in the power. No. I acknowledge that I am a sinner. And I am in need of a Savior. Here's the thing. My name, your name, is written in the Lord's book of life because it's covered by His name. And at His name, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. I have to ask you, my friends, what do you look to in life? What name do you cling to? What title do you hold on to? How do you wish to be known? Paul, in every single one of his epistles except for a few, wrote simply, I, Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ. Paul didn't want to be known as anything more than that. This week, my friends, I really challenge you to look in the mirror and to ask yourself each day, how do I want to be known? What name am I going to go by? And I hope that you see yourself as your name, but it is followed by a redeemed child of God. I am Lazarus, and you are too. May God be our help, our grace, our peace, and our mercy in His name and not ours. Amen.